And greetings, everyone, CAC friends and Conspire partners. Welcome to day 3 and your third and final workshop block. You have chosen a good one. My name is Ben Kesey. I serve as the Development and Strategic Partnerships Director for CAC. And on behalf of all of CAC, we're so excited to have 4 leaders from an amazing partner organization, Illuman, to be with us today. Becoming the men we are meant to be is our topic for this morning. I'm honored to just give this short introduction and play host a little bit. Illuman has been very significant in my own life. I've attended a number of their annual conferences and events, and the vulnerability and powerful experiences amongst males is something that will stick with me for a long, long time. So it's my joy to be here with all of you today. Only final note, the chat over here on the right-hand side, if you're on a computer, or down below, if you have a tablet, use it during the session at will. It'll ask for your name, or you can do it anonymously. With that, Ned, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ben. And welcome, everybody. My name is Ned Abendroth. I'm joining you from Seattle, Washington. And also with us is Giovanni Perez from Los Angeles, originally from Guatemala. Bob Sabbath is joining us from the Washington, D.C. area. And Steve Hicken normally is in the Bay Area, although today he's on the other side of the country. So it's good to be with each of you men today. So we want to start today with a little bit of a story that maybe gets a bit at what this work is that we're about. And it goes like this. Now, once upon a time, there was a young monk who was full of spit and vinegar. He wanted to become a holy man. And so he took a vow of silence and decided he'd go up and he'd live in this cave overlooking the little village that he was from. And all the people in the town were so impressed. And as the months passed by, the legend of the monk in the cave grew. People would say, you know, I think his robes are getting whiter with time. And another person would say, I recently took food up to him, and I noticed he hadn't touched the food from the previous week. I think he's added fasting to his practice. And everyone in the town was so proud of the monk that it overlooked his town, their town, that he was kind of their monk. And they were much better off than those uncivilized dunces down in the village down the road. And this whole thing went on. And it went on and it went on until one day a wise old woman came through the town, and she took in what was there, and she had pity on the entire affair. And so early one morning, she went up to the cave and she said, young brother, how is it that you've become so holy? And the young man opened up one eye, but he said nothing. And at noon, she went back, and this time she asked him for advice on how to quiet the mind. And again, the young man, he kind of furrowed his brow, but again, said nothing. And this went on 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, for 6 days. The woman always with a new question. Each time the monk's body would grow a bit more agitated, but he kept the silence until the 7th morning, when she appeared, and he couldn't even wait for her to speak. He just said, damn it, you know, would you leave me alone? I'm trying to pray up here. And at this outburst, he froze. He was astonished at the anger that had come up from deep within him. And then a cloud of sorrow overtook his face as he realized all those years of sitting alone had still not healed his anger, had not made him a holy man, at least in the way he would understand it. And then the tears came as he looked into the face of the old woman, and he felt seen by her. And he felt the love and grace and kindness flowing through her into him, and she reached out her hand, and he took it, and together they walked back down to the village. It's as one of the Desert Fathers said, that if you see a young man or a young woman climbing toward heaven by their own will, grab their foot and pull them down, it will be for their own good. It'll be for their own good. That the wise woman knew that inner work on a mountaintop, as important as that is, it has to be taken back to the village to be furthered, to be challenged, to be integrated. That inner work, paradoxically, cannot be done alone, can't be done alone. And that the young monk needed the village, and the village needed him. And that perhaps above all, she knew that the only kind of inner work that really mattered in the end was inner work that made a difference in the world. And that is, in a nutshell, what Illuman is about. There are so many things that face us today on the planet, so many forms of domination that have spread out their tendrils into a lot of different sub-stories. Domination of one species, the human, over others, dominations of a race over another race, of a gender over another gender, of a nation over another nation. And we can, there's so many things that we could address by addressing each one of those things. But if we address it from the same place of consciousness from which those problems arose, as it's been said, nothing will ever really change. And it's my conviction, and that the work of Illuman at its heart is helping men get healthier, and that so many of these other problems will begin to take care of themselves as men wake up to who they really are. So with that, welcome again. And Bob, I want to hand it over to you.
Yeah, so we would like you to invite you into council with us, and to imagine that we're sitting in a circle together, and that I have just lit this candle before us. And knowing that words fail, that the deep transformation that we long for, words are not going to get us there. And yet we need words, or we can't be in relationship to each other. And so as we sit in council together before this lit candle, I would just like to invite us into a brief moment of silence, knowing that we need the Holy One, knowing that everything begins in our own poverty, and that we need this higher help. I'd also like to invite us, if it's easy for you, to just to take off your shoe and put your feet on the ground. And we can't be together in physical space, but even if we're in a room, we're not outside, to feel the connection of our feet to the earth and this globe that is connecting our feet. And don't forget that the earth delights to feel your bare feet, and the winds long to play with your hair. So let's just sit together for 30 seconds, and then we'll offer some dedications for this time that we have together. Slower, slower. Smaller, smaller. Poorer, poorer. Quieter, quieter. So Richard, who began this work, I remember he told us that we will not know the fruits of it until 5 generations later. And we often begin our council together with dedications, and we'd like to invite you to put your own dedications in the question, and we'll offer our dedications here. And I would just like to dedicate this work that we do together to the grandson of my grandson, Sebastian. That would be this unknown boy 5 generations from now. And may the inner work that I do now and the heart conversations I have and the intentions I have for my work to make a difference in this broken world, may they ripple down through 5 generations. If you have dedications, it could just be a word. Let's just offer them here. Maybe those of us here too on screen can just offer our own.
I would like to offer our time together for the indigenous peoples throughout the world, that they continue to suffer, they continue to receive the short end on the short end of the stick, as it were, in the decisions that are made. May we be a channel of restoration, a channel of peace, and recovering the dignity of every human being. Oh.
Oh. And I'll offer a dedication to the more than human world, to the trees, to the winged, the finned, the four-legged, particularly today to the salmon who are returning in the Salish Sea, not far from my house. Oh.
Oh.
And my dedication is for us all gathered in this space, this digital space, for the courage to awaken, the courage to awaken to what's happening around us and what's ours to do.
Oh.
Oh.
So I think moving to our next space, we have a couple of what we call prompts, ways to deepen our conversation here. And to start with, the exploration or the invitation that we have for each of us here and for all of us gathered in this space is we hear so often about toxic masculinity, misuse of power, dominance, misogyny, emotional suppression, homophobia, and this a broken sense of self-reliance that we experience in subtle ways around us by men. We're very, and for good reasons, very aware of that. What we wanted to do though right now was to invite an exploration of us here gathered around the beautiful masculinity. So the question, in a moment, I'll ask you to share it in the question box in the chat area, and we'll also have a short time, Bob and Ned and Giovanni, be able to speak to this. But into the question, think of this for now. Is there some aspect of beautiful masculinity that you've experienced that you'd like to hold forward? Or if there is a man in your life who has lived this out for you, without really knowing what it means, go ahead and put either this quality in the question box, or the first name of the man in the question box. And and we'll take about 10 seconds just quietly to allow those responses to begin appearing in the chat. And then I'll ask Ned and Giovanni and Bob to respond to that. So thank you for leaning into this together. Ned, if you wouldn't mind going first, a beautiful quality of masculinity or a man who exhibits this.
Sure, yeah. For me, in my own grief work, especially during my battle with cancer, there was I learned how to grieve from women, but it was with my grief work with men that this particular fierce edge to it came out, that unlocked parts of grief and praise for life, and love for the world that I had not ever seen before my engagement with some amazing men. So for fierce grief. Oh.
Thank you, Ned. Giovanni?
For me, it would have to be, among many others, the ability of men showing affection and love to other men. Men usually or culturally distrust other men's touch, but I have been able, I think, thanks to this work that we've done, to identify those moments in which honest, wholesome affection, physical affection, has just made my day. I play soccer at an old men's league, and just recently I came back after a long period of absence, and these men are just your most secular and crude men, and they received me with such love and such tender. Good to see you, Giovanni. We missed you. And it was so great to receive such honest love. It had nothing to do with religion and, dare say, spirituality, but there was certainly a spiritual component of such affection. Oh.
Thank you, Giovanni. Bob?
Yeah, I'm remembering a time when Richard invited a bunch of us to gather in the desert, and I thought we were going to be doing some business. We had a lot of business to do, more than the 3 days we had scheduled. And yet the first thing that Richard does is he sends us into the desert to be alone for literally the whole time, for 2 days. And then when we got to the business, we were able to do 3 days of business in a half a day. And I think what I got from that is that the work we do depends on our doing our own shadow work, being able to see where we're hung up. It's really difficult to see ourselves as we are, and the commitment of a group of men to do their own inner work, to work on what's hidden from them, to try to make it visible, and to know that that has a ripple effect. And if we're not doing that work, the work that we do in the world can become so flawed and contradictory. So I'm really, for the group of men who are vulnerable and willing to do that inner journey, is what I've really taken from this.
Thank you, Bob. So we'll move now, and in a moment, but hold on for just a second, we'll look at some slides here. The question then arises then, well, who this Illuman here, what is this in a nutshell? How are you guys living this out? So this is, thank you for the slide there. This work actually started 30 years ago. Illuman itself is an organization roughly 10 years ago, but in a nutshell, really, Illuman is so deeply rooted in CAC's work and Richard's work, who did a lot of reading and study about male, especially rites of passage, in the late 80s, early 1990s, began what's called, what you'll hear us refer to as a ritual called the men's rite of passage, which Richard got together with Stephen Gamble and others at the CAC to put these on, in the first in 1996. There have been numerous of these rites of passages. We can go ahead, yeah. These rites of passages, which form the core initial program of Illuman, there's others now, but you can see the dots around the world. They've been held in the United States, in Europe, in Australia. We have men in other countries that are asking about it. There's, I think the slide there mentions Brazil. There's other inquiries from Latvia. In any case, it's a global movement. Illuman was founded as an organization in 2012 and continues walking very closely with with the CAC. 6,000 men have been initiated only in the United States since 2012, and that doesn't include the ones before 2012 as CAC, nor does it include the men internationally as well. We have 18 chapters, contacts in 36 states. So we've been developing a footprint rooted very deeply in the practice that we're sharing with you right now. Now, if we could bring up the slide, Bob will speak about our mission.
Yes, we are men transforming men through a power greater than ourselves. So we recognize, we don't come from any one tradition, but we recognize that there is a spirituality and a longing and a power greater than ourselves that's needed for our deepest transformation. We're seeking a life-changing spirituality, not one that's cut off from the world, but one that gets engaged and seeks to put our life to mend a broken world. Our primary concern is inner work that makes a difference in the world. We're not just doing this work for ourselves, but it's so that we can have a better world as well. We're fed by the wisdom traditions of forgiveness and radical inclusivity. We have a lot to grow in that. We're mostly older white men, and we're seeking to figure out how to break some of those age boundaries and other boundaries. And we are fed by many wisdom streams. Our work recovers traditional patterns of male initiation, affirms a masculine path to healing, reveals the true and false self, and honors the path of descent. We'll say more about the path of descent a little bit later on. And as I said, words fail. So for us, we've had to do this journey through the power of nature, through ritual and image, story and counsel. We have to use words, but we also know that the deep transformation and wholeness that we long for has to get beyond those as well.
Thank you, Bob. We can, and then we turn to Giovanni to tell us about what we call our 5 touchstones, our journey of illumination.
Thank you. These are helpful practices that we want to encourage every one of us to engage in. We call them the journey of illumination, joy. And so we need to know that spirituality has to be a habit, and healthy spirituality is about doing the work, not just talking or thinking or studying about it, but the actual doing of the work. And so the first of the practices is centering. We need to be able to show up and observe life, and observe what is the true source that keeps us going. So each day we are challenged to make contact with that true source for ourselves. The second practice is that of gathering. we need to show up and get together. As it was mentioned before, we cannot do this work alone. We need a community. And so we challenge ourselves to find um, places in men with whom to meet regularly for support and accountability of our own journey as well. We take this journey as a serious component. The third practice is that of connecting. We don't just show up and be together with one another, but we show up and share with one another that which is going on in our lives. Um, we need to keep our minds and our hearts open to be connected, to have our body center and our emotions grounded. And when we share not what we know or our opinion, but we share what is really going on in our hearts, in our lives. The fourth practice is that of releasing. We show up and we try to let go. Living in the present moment requires that we uh, are able to identify those things that no longer serve in our journey, that we have outgrown them and we need to let them go. Solitude and silence are traditional ways of allowing this for this to happen. And the fifth practice is that of serving. What good would it do for us to have all this holiness or all these spiritual awakenings if it doesn't serve the greater good, the common good? So we need to show up and act. We need to find ways of give it away. To have it for ourselves is to lose it. So we show up and try to be uh, a service to the world, to humanity, to our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanni. And then Ned, could you just share a little bit about our programs, our actions? What is Illuman doing?
Sure. So a lot could be said about all of the various retreats and councils and that are going on all over the U.S. and really all over a number of countries. But I would say that if you were to look at our footprint and the men who've been involved in Illumin for a long time, we would say that we are being transformed as much by our relationships with each other. And that the events are really an excuse to be together and to do some of this work in community. But it's what's happening between the events. It's the experience of somebody else's transformational presence in our lives that is taking the work to an entirely deeper place. If you want to know more about our events, you'll see how to get a hold of them a little bit later on our website.
Great. Thank you, Ned. So we turn now to another prompt, and I'll be asking Bob and Giovanni and Ned, then the prompter, what are some of the essential gifts Illumin is offering to the world? So if you could, Giovanni, if you could speak to that, and we're maybe make it a little, we call it lean of speech. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, let me start by using this short poem by Hafiz. The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage who has to duck his head when the moon is low keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. We live in imprisoned systems, culturally speaking, and I believe that what we have experienced in Illuman is such a liberating power of connecting men that are dropping keys for us rowdy prisoners to break free from the chains of this very sickening uh, um, stereotypical paradigms of what does it mean to be a man. So most certainly what we need to do is we have encountered, I have encountered that this is a place where we can create and explore greater forms of healthy masculinity. I remember in one of my experiences, I've always been very much insecure about my height and my stature. And talking about this with another man, he said to me, Giovanni, there is nothing small about you. And hence dropped another key for me. It was liberating. It was good for me to know that I was able to not enclose myself in such insecurity, but rather to break free and to realize the goodness, the beauty that is in me, as well as it is in other brothers. So I'm gonna stop right there and allow other men to speak.
Thank you, Giovanni. Then Bob?
Yeah, one of the things we talk a lot about is journey of descent, and it's a spirituality for the second half of life. What do we do when things fall apart, and when all of our dreams and our disappointments, our betrayals, our communities, our organizations, when it all starts to fall apart? And often that doesn't hit until the second stage of life. And a lot of this work is having to do with this. If we don't find ways to transform our pain, we just keep transmitting it. But the irony is we need community in order to work on ourselves, to be vulnerable, to heal these broken parts within us. And yet community is so damn hard. I mean, how do we even survive the harsh truth of community? I've been in intentional community literally for almost 50 years, and I can tell you it's a big mess. But what I've learned in it is that mess can be holy mess. And that, in fact, some of the soil out of which the new things grow come at those places where things have fallen apart. And I think that's one of the reasons we need spiritual practice, because we're never in the right community. We always think it's better somewhere else. But if we can develop the inner strength to pass through that fire, that holy mess, that's often the birthplace for the new things in us and within the community that need to be born. And I have found within Illuman a group of men who are willing to stand strong, both in the mess of their own lives, the mess of the work that they do, and find ways to turn it into holy mess. It's a beautiful alchemy if we can bear it.
Thank you, Bob. Ned?
Yeah, well, one of the things that is so close to my heart is just the ecological crisis that is facing all of us. Not all of us alone in the human world, but all beings on this earth. And to me, one of the great ways we can address that is to help people fall in love with the more than human world, and to spend enough time out there to realize that they are not separate, that they are not other than what is outside of our windows and walls and asphalt. And once we start to recognize that really everything is holy, is divine, is full of God, it becomes very hard to abuse it. So Hafiz put it this way. He said, since there's nothing outside my master's body, I try and show reverence to all things. Or Meister Eckhart put it when he said, I'm not God, but I'm not other than God. And so a lot of our work is taking and putting men in a place like Bob referenced earlier, putting them in nature, telling them to sit still long enough to get beyond the boredom that might come and start to realize, oh my gosh, look, God everywhere. And so that's been a great gift of Illuman for me. I know we're not the only ones offering it, but it's going to take many villages similar to ours to help the whole world start to fall in love with itself.
Thank you. Thanks, Ned, and Giovanni and Bob. And right now, as we move to our next prompt, we just invite you out there, is there a word or a phrase or a concept that as we've been sharing that comes to mind, something that Ned or Bob or Giovanni has said? Go ahead and put that word or phrase, enter that in the question box now. So moving forward then, please do that even as we're sharing, because part of this, our digital experience is that we're speaking and we're interacting. We would all love to be together, but we can't do that. So this is our next best way to kind of connect with each other. Our next prompt here is really going kind of to the heart of the matter to Bob and Giovanni and Ned. How has Illuman's work shaped you personally? How has it really touched your heart? And maybe we'll go with Bob and then Giovanni and Ned in that order. Bob, how has Illuman really touched your heart?
Well, one way is just the men that have become part of my lives. So I went to a gathering in 2006 in upstate New York. There was 102 men that were there. And I met a guy named Joel Blanc, and I met a guy named Mark Greiner, and another guy, Billy McLaughlin. And we were not in the same circle together, but we kept connection. And just a couple of weeks ago, I'm in a conversation. I'm at the home of Joel Blanc, and Mark Reiner's there, and we're realizing that these connections that we have with each other, otherwise we wouldn't have known each other. And just the fact that Illuman has gathered a group of men who share a common purpose, and otherwise I never would have met these guys, and how much they're kind of baked into my life now. So I'm just realizing the community that's formed, and maybe that's true for a lot of us.
Thank you, Bob. Giovanni?
Yeah, very similar, but I also hope that that my wife, my daughters, those that are close to me, my son, that they can see the fruits of this work, that I can perhaps be a better listener to them, a better man that really is out to serve and to put aside my own, in a very healthy way, my wants, and to see them before me. What I have learned and what I have received in Illuman is such an affirmation of my intrinsic goodness that it has to be shared, and it has to be visible in everything I do. And so the way I conduct my life, once my spiritual director, who's also part of the Illuman work, keeps asking me the question, what would a man do, Giovanni? What would a man do? And what is the kind of man that I want to become? It's a becoming. So I go back to that source. What do a healthy Giovanni look like? So yeah, it's shaping, brothers.
Thank you, Giovanni. Ned?
Yeah, well, had the strange experience of going on my MROP and being told to die before you die, as our Muslim brothers and sisters teach in the Quran. Really, every tradition teaches it. And then within a matter of months, being given very low odds of living due to cancer. And somehow, the work of Illuman to let go of life, or life in this current form, and to embrace not only birth, but also death. To what does it look like to welcome cancer as a teacher, as part of this world that I don't need to necessarily oppose, but can we actually include even something like that? And so it prepared me for that journey. And then the grief on the other side. There was first a sense of equanimity that seemed unnaturally available to me in those early days of cancer. But then as I started to tap into this deep desire to live, and to be here for my kids, be here for my own partner, and then the grief came. The grief, which is like the best expression of praise for life, for form, for that which might not be that much longer. I cannot imagine going through that journey alone, and I never was alone, because and not just that I had people with me on the journey, but that there was a wisdom tradition that prepared me, that gave me a posture on how to approach each step of the journey that was very countercultural to what we hear in the US mostly, which is a deep fear of death, a deep fear of dying, a desire to always extend life at any cost, what we would perceive as life. Somehow we think death and life are in opposition, as opposed to death being part of life with a capital L. So that's just a couple things for me.
Thank you. And I'll share something here too, but I do want to give us all here a heads up that in a moment we're going to be asking you for questions to put in the question box. So go ahead, please be formulating any questions. We'll just have 10 minutes to. We wish we had more time, but we can maybe select a few with Ben's help when we get there. But the one thing I wanted to share about this, how it's changed my life, I have 4 sons. They now range in age from 26 to 40. And along in solidarity with the men of Illuman, and prior to that, it was called Males when it was part of CAC. My sons, I've participated with my sons, and they have seen me live into this with other men. And that has completely changed the horizon of how they undertake their masculinity in the world. And it's an incredible gift for me to experience how they've gone places with it that I could never have imagined. So this is already passing along generationally to them, and actually back to me as a father, and now as a grandfather as well. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that's been happening. So there's, I want to turn to questions. I did want to let you know there's a little segment here that we had hoped to cover, that there are some emerging themes in Illuman that are on our plates. We mentioned diversity already. We mentioned we mentioned rites of passage with men at different ages, and we're trying to undertake that work. What does that look like? Let me see. Oh, our interfaith work, the work of how our faith expression is expressed through the perennial tradition. We have some work to do on that. So there's a number of themes that we're exploring, that we're undertaking this with every bit of courage and humility that we can do, and we're completely engaged with all that. Some of this may come up in your questions too. So with that, thank you, Ned and Giovanni and Bob. We're not going away yet, but we just let me invite Ben now to join us and help us to curate and select a few of the questions. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Steve.
Go
Thank
ahead
you
and
all.
please put those questions in the box now, that as they come through, maybe Ben can select some and prompt us to answer. Thank you.
You know, I'm gonna select one of the comments that just feels like the most Illuman, just the speak from the heart theme here, and this is from an unnamed friend. And it's a tough one. He says, "Stuck in old patterns, sexually inadequate in the middle of divorce, struggling with my own identity and the anger you described. I've been so angry and controlling for so long and alone, even in the midst of this conference. I've allowed my sexual inadequacy to define my worth all my life. And I'm wondering if we could speak to the pain that exists, right now, even on this call. So, any of you brothers feel inspired to reflect on that?"
Thank you, brother, for sharing that honest comment. Yesterday morning, I met with an international group, Illuman en Español, and the topic was shame. We were just sharing about shame, and something that was shared is that all are welcome, and all about you is welcome. Our insecurities, our fears, our anger, our inadequacies, everything about you is welcome in this sacred circle.
I would just
And go ahead, Bob.
I think it's really hard for men to find a place where some of these things can safely be spoken of. And I would just encourage our friend, to reach out to one of us. There are some circles, there are safe circles where these kind of questions can be safely worked with. I wish there was a get out of life free card, but there's not. And ironically, these kind of vulnerable, painful life questions can become the seed ground for the deepest transformation in us. But it's a painful journey, but it's one worth going through, and we need to find a safe context where we can not go underground and put out the deep questions that are troubling our lives.
Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Bob. Another question here is, I'm interested in how we initiate our boys into their own. Additional he goes on to say, how do we incorporate Mother Earth women into that process for young men? I see the need for men speaking to men, but what role does the mother play? Thank you for this time together. Maybe Steve, would you reflect on that?
Sure. One of the practices that, along with Illuman, we've lived out is to develop family-based rites of passage. And that can work well for a family where there's enough males that you can reach out to that are on something of a path, not professionally or necessarily sort of in a professed way, but that can work. One of the ways, so yes, I mean, there's a model that we can share for that. The second thing is our experience in our family has been to receive the young man into the family from boy to man, that stage of rite of passage. It really does need to be the men in the family that lead on that. However, there's a very explicit link with the mothers and the women that are also around and supporting and active, though not exactly present on the weekend itself. I will say, in addition to your question, that's a path that we have yet to explore, and this is just something that we've done so far, but much more lies ahead of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Ned, a question really to your heart here is, what role do you think an engaged connection with nature has to play in the development of a healthy, grounded, and mature masculinity? And I'll tag on a second small question that people have asked what "ho" means. They've heard that just be
Sure.
so maybe you can just address that as well.
Yeah, well, let's answer the second one first. So, the way we use that word is simply a way of being able to say, I hear you, I see you, and I honor your presence in this time. It doesn't, how is it that we can say and give a response that is other than silence, but is not necessarily a yes, I agree with what you're saying, or I affirm what you've shared, as much as to say I affirm you. And so there's that's the word we've used at this point. And there's, if you've been around men's work, and there's kind of a heritage of a variety of words that might be shared, and that happens to be one of the ones that we use in terms of nature. Of course, the first thing is to start to realize that there is no like going out into nature, that we are already in nature. And so this dualism that we have to leave our houses and go out into it, is so problematic, and yet it still exists. It's very real. There's a story that often gets shared within Illuman circles that I think kind of gets to this question, which there's it's a story, a Jewish story that comes to us from Europe, and it's a boy who he and his father would go to the synagogue to pray, and the father said, you don't have to necessarily come with me. And the boy said, oh, that's wonderful. I'd like to go out into the woods. And so every day, as the father would go to synagogue to pray, the boy would go out into the woods and spend time out there. And this went on for some time, but finally the father, full of curiosity, said, what are you doing out there when you're in the woods and I'm in the synagogue praying? And the boy said, oh, I'm praying too. I'm out in the woods. And the father was at first a little bit surprised by this and grateful for the answer, but then he said, well, that's wonderful, but you don't have to go. The weather's kind of getting to be cold and wet, and you don't have to go out there. God is the same everywhere, whether in the woods or in the village. And the boy thought about this for a moment, and he paused and he said, yeah, that's true, Father. God is the same everywhere, but I'm not, I'm not. And so there is something about being out in what is often called within the CAC and other circles, the green scriptures, the first Bible, that undoes us, our small notions, our little narratives about who we are. And we start to tap into awe. And if there is nothing other than getting in touch with a sense of awe for what is, that is enough to be the thread that can lead you back to vitality. And so this is not necessarily true just of masculinity. I do think we could, if we had time, we could speak. I mean, this is kind of a human experience, but there is a masculine side to that story and a feminine side, and probably other gendered expressions as well, about what does it look like to sit in nature, and why does it have that impact on us?
And then just to wrap up, there's 135 comments. I wish we could get to many more, but Steve, there's a number that are just very practical. What's going on with Solarize, your annual conference that's coming up? Is there a local chapter near me? So maybe you could hit on some of those practical, how can men plug in from here as we wrap up the session?
No, thank you, Ben. Thanks for the questions. We wish we could get to all of them. Maybe we'll find a way to do that someday. But what we can do, thank you, Ben, we'll turn our attention to a couple of this, a way to contact Illuman and connect up with our work. And I'll ask if you could bring up the slide which says check us out here. There it is, check us out here. You don't have to write all these down. Pay attention to that top one there, www.illuman.org, WW for the United States, but therein you will see links to all these other locations in the other countries as well. And then you can also find us on social media. Advancing to the next slide there, which there it is, entry points. We do have our Solarize online conference coming up. You can find information of that on our website. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. And you can find us on YouTube. Let me just mention, on our website, you can find information about how to join up online with what we call virtual counsel. So without having to travel, and in these times of COVID, how important that is to protect our health, there is a way that you can link up with us through virtual counsel. Through our men's rites of passages and umbrales, which is the Spanish version. It's the same. It's the men's. It's the name for rites of passage that we use in Spanish. We have 2022 dates on our website, we're having to, like every other organization, just kind of check the latest on safety factors. We're scheduling 2022, but we're monitoring that as well. Then there's chapter-sponsored retreats and gatherings. You'll find information about where these chapters are in regions in the United States. You find those on our website. You can also ask for the newsletter, which we call the Drumbeat. And just the last slide here, if we could advance that now to that slide there, which is this. And by the way, this artwork is done by Stephen Gamble here, one of our really a co-founder of what has become Illuman with Richard. Rather than we need you, it's like we need each other. And so the only thing you really have to remember, commit this to memory, info@illuman.org as an email, info@illuman.org. If you can suggest men for us to get in contact with or questions you have, send that to us. Give a couple of days for us to kind of sort through, but we will definitely be responding to you for that. So thank you. These are just a few points of ways to follow up with us. So thank you very much for spending this time with us, to Ned, Giovanni, Ben, Bob. And we'll turn now to Giovanni for our closing ritual.
Thank you. Bob earlier spoke about that we use the power of ritual to share, to explore, to listen to the Great Spirit. So at this moment, in this last couple of minutes, I'm going to ask you to, if you have with you a pen, and think of a man in your life, a special man. And it's important in ritual to use our bodies as well. So I'm going to ask you to write the name of that man or men in your life in your hand. So let's take a few seconds to do that. And with great intentionality, brothers, I don't know if you can see, please hold up your hand, the name of the man. Bless these men. Take a deep breath and bring them to your heart and hold them there. Honor them. Bless them. Oh.
Oh. Well, thank you very much. That concludes our time with you together. Blessings to all.